Unfortunately, time has not been kind to me, so I haven't been able to prepare a presentation. So I'm just going to stand here and I'm going to explain to you from a practical perspective what we at the law faculty have done, firstly in relation to developing a writing across the curriculum strategy, and secondly and more specifically, how we've identified and developed writing intensive courses across the curriculum and where it slots into our strategy. I'm going to be speaking for about 15 minutes and then I'm going to open the floor and then we can engage in a discussion about the issue. I think as a point of departure, I identified two pieces of writing that I thought was very relevant to this session. The first one is a quote by Hansted, and if you just bear with me, I'm going to read it. What writing across the curriculum recognizes then is that students need more practice and more instruction in composition in order to become the writers we want them to be. Indeed, given that employers regularly cite writing as the top skill they look for in employees, and that most of our students were raised in the age of Twitter and Facebook, where an extended argument equals all of 140 characters, an emphasis on developing writing skills has become all the more important. And secondly, in a recent study assessing the writing skills of new lawyers published in the Journal of Legal Education, it was concluded that most lawyers, including most new lawyers, do not write well. Part of the problem is that law schools offer few opportunities for students to practice and hone their newly acquired skills learned in their first year legal writing courses. And I think that's a good point of departure for the discussion that's going to follow now. There's a growing body of scholarship that advocates for the adoption of writing across the curriculum programs. And this growing body of scholarship also supports the writing in the discipline method to legal writing. In other words, students, specifically in the law faculty, depending on the discourse community in which you find yourself, need to learn to write in the discipline of lawyers as opposed to some other discipline or some other discourse community, some other profession. Students need to learn to write like lawyers, and a distinction should be made between writing to learn and learning to write. What we at the faculty are focused on are getting our students to write within a specific substantive subject discipline. In other words, they learn to write in law. So it's in that context that we've identified and developed writing intensive courses. What is a writing intensive course? From our experience, our writing intensive courses are typically identifiable with reference to three characteristics. First characteristic is our writing intensive courses are assignment centered rather than being text or lecture centered. In other words, the focus in the writing intensive courses are assignments. So assignment design is a critical component of a writing intensive course. Secondly, these writing intensive courses are structured in such a way that they provide room and the tools for students to engage in exploratory thinking and writing, because we all know that writing is the end result of a process of critical thinking. Finally, the lecturers of writing intensive courses encourage students to become actively involved in their own learning processes. What this means is that there's a departure away from, the doctrinal method of teaching where you simply convey the information to a position where students are required to grapple with the substantive content of the module themselves. They have to do more figuring out for themselves. So those are the three characteristics that I identified that those are the three characteristics of writing intensive courses at the faculty. And I think now may be a prudent time just to give you some background as to the writing project at the faculty. In 2011, the law faculty implemented a writing across the curriculum strategy. The purpose of the strategy was to develop students' critical thinking and writing skills, including their reading and research skills. The view at the time was that the faculty can't develop those skills by simply adopting uncoordinated, ad hoc writing exercises. So what the faculty did is they identified various mandatory and voluntary components. These components are mutually complementary. They don't operate in isolation. There are 5 mandatory components and 2 voluntary components in the faculty's writing across the curriculum project. Firstly, we've got Writing Skills 171. It's a compulsory first year writing skills module, a generic writing skills module, compulsory for all first year students except, unfortunately, our accounting students. That's an issue for a separate discussion. But for all other students, it's compulsory. Secondly, we've got writing intensive courses. I'm going to return to the writing intensive courses shortly. Our third mandatory component is a writing guide. Theoretically, and I say theoretically, I'm hoping that's what the lecturers at the faculty do, the guide should constitute the basis for the assessment of any written work undertaken by undergraduate students at the faculty under the auspices of the faculty. So the writing guide sets out the faculty's writing expectations in a way that's understandable for students and for academic staff. The fourth component is, and some say the most important component, is the glue that glues all the various components together, and that's the writing consultants. We've got 4 full-time writing consultants at the faculty. They are at the faculty on a daily basis from 8 to 5, and they are available to assist undergraduate and postgraduate students with any writing advice that they require. So the appointment system for the writing consultants is made available on the voluntary intervention, the first voluntary intervention, which is the faculty's legal writing blog. So if you access the legal writing blog, you can make an appointment with the writing consultant, you can download the writing framework that I've referred to, and you can get information relating to your generic writing skills module and certain writing intensive modules. That's the first voluntary intervention. And the second voluntary intervention is our annual writing skills in legal education workshop. That's not relevant for the present discussion. I want to deal with the writing intensive course component and what that practically entails. In Writing Skills 171, we identify various skills that students need to possess at the time of graduating from the law faculty. Those skills include the ability to formulate an argument, the ability to reference properly according to the referencing style contained in our writing guide, the ability to draft a proper introduction and conclusion, the ability to draft an email and a fax. Again, I think it's important to state that students are taught to draft, to write within the context of their specific discourse community, and those forms of correspondence are important in a legal context. So those skills are identified in writing skills and dealt with generically. In writing intensive courses in the first year and subsequent to the first year as part of the undergraduate degree, students are exposed to specific substantive disciplines where express aims are communicated to students in relation to the specific writing skills that will be dealt with in that module. For example, we've got a third year module, International Law. In international law, express sessions is express sessions are conducted on advanced referencing international sources. So the skills are scaffolded upon the first year, generic skills that we dealt with, generic referencing methods, and the ability to reference in accordance with our writing guide. In third year, in the form of large class sessions or small group settings such as tutorial sessions, the students are exposed to the further specialized development of those skills. Importantly, it does not take place in isolation from the substantive law under discussion in the module. The teaching takes place simultaneously. How the development of a writing intensive course practically takes place is that previously I sat with the lecturers of the writing intensive courses, and I sat with a writing guide and the outcomes identified in the writing guide, the skills that I've referred to. And I've said to them, what do you think are the most compatible skills with specific reference to your course framework and to your course content? And we identified skills, and then we developed express sessions where those skills are dealt with. It might be something as simple as focusing on reading a case and reformulating the wording of a case so that it's a proper introduction, or something more express where 70% of the assessment is dependent on proper international referencing of sources. So it varies. But that being said, there are various practical difficulties. I'm not going to stand here and say it's easy to develop a writing across the curriculum strategy, to develop writing intensive courses. Lecturers are hesitant to develop a writing intensive course, and there are various reasons for that. If I think about it, reasons that have been communicated to me is plagiarism, poorly drafted papers, institutional barriers such as large student enrollment, increased pressure on publishing and conducting research, lecturers who simply don't feel confident enough to teach students how to write, or who don't enjoy writing themselves. And as I've mentioned, as soon as you teach a writing intensive course, your teaching style will inevitably change. So there are practical difficulties, but there are ways to overcome it. Honestly, I think limiting the damage is the answer. I don't think you can overcome the challenges completely. I think realistically, changing your module, developing it into a writing intensive course, entails an increased workload, and that's the reality. The ways that you can overcome it, based on our experience at the faculty, is firstly by conducting adequate planning. Adequate planning can eliminate many of the barriers associated with transitioning from a normal course into a writing intensive course. Secondly, requiring students to conduct continuous revisions of their assignments we found to be quite useful. It ensures students, apart from becoming more effective writers, it limits instances of plagiarism, and it ensures that students grapple with the substantive content of the module. Institutional resources need to be ascertained and utilized if available. I think at the faculty we've been in a privileged position where we've got sufficient amounts of funding to appoint writing consultants, and we can engage the writing consultants in respect of the writing intensive courses. So where there's additional assessment that needs to be undertaken, the writing consultants can assist in conducting the assessments. On that note, developing assessment scales. That's also a key component of limiting the additional workload, especially where lecturers are under time constraints, and I think that's all of us. That being said, it's important to keep in mind that not all written work needs to be evaluated or rewritten or formal. So a key component of a writing intensive course is the exploratory thinking and writing component. So tools like peer review become useful when you develop your course into a writing intensive course. I just want to see if there are any other importantly, in Writing Skills 171, there are express sessions when the outcomes of each skill is discussed in class, of each lecture is discussed in class. For example, the first lecture deals with you need to be able to read and understand a question. Simple skill. That's the first port of call in Writing Skills 171. Read and understand the question. That's all we expect. When the outcome is discussed with the students, the lecturer in the Writing Skills 171 specifically refers to the subsequent writing intensive courses and how that skill will be scaffolded upon in subsequent years, so that when students enter into the writing intensive course, they know what to expect. They know what they need to do to be a good legal writer in the context of that specific substantive discipline. Is it worthwhile? Um, there will definitely be lectures that will say to you it's not worthwhile. I just don't have the time for it, even though it might have benefits um, for me because I can understand what the students are writing and it makes difference in their results in subsequent years potentially. Um, the majority of lecturers that I've encountered who have developed their modules into writing intensive courses are enthusiastic enough to retain their courses as writing intensive courses, firstly, and there is a seemingly permanent enthusiastic core of lecturers plus additional lecturers who have in fact developed their courses into writing intensive courses. So, I think you should be very careful to draw a link between the improvement in writing skills and adopting a writing intensive course. I think various other factors play a role in developing writing skills. But the view that we have is that it definitely makes a difference in the development of our students' writing skills. Obviously not in isolation, in conjunction with those other mandatory components that I've referred to. So that's what we at the faculty have done. Yeah, and let's talk about it.
I have a question about your writing consultants.
Yeah.
So what is the uptake usually? What percentage of students will actually go out of their own and go and talk to a writing consultant?
When I joined the faculty in 2012, sorry, I'm just going to stay there. When I joined the faculty in 2012, 53 appointments were made. At that point in time, we had 6 writing consultants rotating. So there was only one consultant at the faculty at any point in time. 53 consultations in the calendar year of 2012. Last year, we had just over 1,000 consultations at the writing consultants. And I think the reasons are manifold. It's easy to make an appointment. Students establish a personal relationship with a consultant because they've been there for a while now. So they've got a permanent presence at the faculty. They are part of the faculty, and that's how students perceive it. And students are appreciating the relevance of the legal writing assistance or the value that it can add. And in some cases it's as simple as lecturers forcing students before submission to visit the writing consultant. So there's definitely been an increase, but the reasons for the increase are big. But again, the writing consultants, we started small, but we've been able to get funding to get, firstly, more writing consultants appointed, and secondly, the quality of the writing consultants are, I mean, we've got writing consultants who've got law degrees, so they know how to write in law, which is obviously important. And we obviously want to create a measure of permanence. So funding is a big thing. Yes. Yes, writing skills 171, extremely negative feedback. Um, don't see the value of it. The general perception is that amongst our students that they can write. That's the perception. In 2014, I asked them in the first lecture in Writing Skills 171 to just one question: do you think you can write in law? And 67% of them said yes, they can. So that's the problem that you need to overcome. So Writing Skills 171, exceedingly negative. Subsequent years, on the continuum, increasing to the final year, the appreciation for the amount of writing that's undertaken. So second year writing intensive courses, still negative, but more positive than Writing Skills 171. And then in final year, relatively positive about the value of the writing intensive courses and even Writing Skills 171. And that's why we've now started to appoint final year students to teach Writing Skills 171, so that those students can relate to the first year students, because those students also do not appreciate the value of Writing Skills 171. But yeah, I mean, still a negative. And what a lecturer has said to me is that it appears to her to benefit the better. So the better the student performs academically, the more the writing intensive course benefits. That's been communicated to me. So, but obviously I can't verify whether that's in fact.
Was it you had a strategy to design the product?
No, so the faculty board conceived of the strategy in, I think it was 2010, with the assistance of the Center for Teaching and Learning. There was no obligation on staff other than Writing Skills 171. The staff presented, taught the module initially, 4 or 5 lecturers. Other than that, no obligation to become involved. So there were various objectives formulated. Some of those objectives were only implemented in the 3rd year of the implementation of the writing across the curriculum, like the writing intensive courses. We had to get lecturers to appreciate the fact that it's an across the curriculum strategy. None of the components operate in isolation, so it's important that they buy into it.
Have you had any feedback from employers?
Not yet. Taking into account that we implemented in 2020. So our pilot phase, it was a 4-year pilot phase, terminated at the end of last year. So the first batch of students are currently in theory, in practice, doing the articles. That being said, as I've said, writing intensive courses were only really implemented 2013, 2014. So they didn't get exposure to those components. So, I'd say in 5 years time, you can go to an employer and say, what's the quality of the student like? At the same time, you need to take into account that the view is that secondary education is the quality of secondary education is decreased. So, to what extent is the writing initiative contributing to the development of writing skills? are we now simply maintaining the status quo trying to limit the damage, or are we actually developing this? So I think it's difficult to quantify the difference that the strategy makes. What I do know is in the absence of the strategy, it would be problematic.
Why and do you perhaps have that in mind to speak to some of the graduates, maybe from extract, instead of going to the company, but to actually speak to people who got in course and who experienced it, to ask them how did they find the working environment in terms of writing? What were the challenges that feedback into the program?
I think that's a very good idea. What we did do is last year, I think in the first semester, we engaged external consultants to evaluate the pilot phase of the project. And during that process, we started to appreciate the absence of the lack of proper data. Forget about input from practice. Students went through the process. We didn't have sufficient data, existing data at the faculty from students who are currently in the process of being exposed to this strategy. So we thought we did enough. We clearly didn't. So I think it's a great idea. That being said, a lot of planning needs to go in before implementing writing across the curriculum strategy. If you want to measure, try and measure the difference. We did identify a test group of students, about 35 to 40 students, and we tried to track them from their first to their final year. And we devised assessment scale to measure their writing in first, second, third, and fourth year. Obviously, there was an improvement in the writing skills, but there was also an increase in maturity, an increased understanding of the substantive content of the modules. So it's problematic. I don't have the answer. But I do think that in the absence of the project, we wouldn't have seen such a difference. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, just one final thing from my side. I think realistically speaking, funding should be the key. If you've got funding available to appoint assistants, to get tutors, even if it's finding the students to assess with reference to an assessment scale that we've developed, so that you don't have to carry the extra burden that comes with writing principles. Those are the type of things that you need to think about if you decide to develop your motion for writing. Yes.
About the writing consultants, you mentioned that they will be involved in the various components together. So they clearly have a relationship with students. What is their relationship with the lecturers?
Did you read the report? Because that's one of the common aspects in the report is the lack of communication between the consultants and the lecturers. Even though there is at a very low level communication between consultants and some of the writing intensive course lecturers, for various reasons, sometimes communication is lacking. The lecturer might be too busy, the consultants are fully booked for a 3-week period and don't have time after hours to communicate with the lecturer. So that's to some extent problematic. And there should be proper continuous communication between the writing consultants and the lecturers. Let me give an example. Why? Our writing guide says you have to reference in a certain way. Some of the lecturers differ or prescribe their own way of referencing in certain circumstances. In the absence of communication between the lecturer and the writing consultant advises the student that it's incorrectly done. Even if the lecturer says that's how it should be done, we don't trust the student. We trust the writing guide. Student admits, loses marks. So we've had feedback in that. We try and ensure that there's communication, but it's difficult. But they should be.
So what are you doing about the students elections to say writing intensive courses on video students? I'm assuming that that's always a small percentage. Is there a strategy to help those who are not benefiting as much as
Yeah, apart from firstly communicating to the lecturers that they need to get those students to see the consultants. The consultants play a crucial role. Because once they've seen the student and they've identified that it's a problem, then they force the student to come out, basically. So you can't make such a big difference in a once-off 1 hour consultation session. The difference comes in when there's follow-up consultation. So the consultants do try and do it. They're all aware of it. So those students are encouraged to go to consultants and to use their own computer space. We've also referred students to the reading lab because the consultants have on occasion realized that some students have a problem with reading and that before the writing advice should be given by the consultants, they first need to go to the reading lab. So, again, it's not the consultants in isolation, but all various external factors.
You mentioned that you're doing the checking process across the college, across the university. And you mentioned that you're looking at the assessment skills, how they assess on the assignments. But I'm actually looking at the writing itself and how the writing is progressed in the actual student.
Looking at the actual writing, but we appointed a postdoctoral student to assess with reference to an assessment scale that we developed with external consultants. And the assessment scale measured, for example, the ability to form opinion, which we regard as a writing skill. But obviously, it tells us a substantive component. The only way that you assess the writing is to understand the legal argument that's being conveyed in the written communication. So there is an aspect of substantive performance, but essentially we seek to measure the improvement in the writing.
That's substantive. Trying to look at improvement, you need those kinds of longitudinal studies. The only way you can do it. But you need to do it by looking at the documents. That students develop voice, the ability to write as a lawyer. You need to practice that.
Yeah, that's true.
I think it's an amazing thing, strategy put together and executed. I'm just thinking about these courses themselves. So what's the main focus of courses? Would it be the writing skills or the content or the combination?
So those express sessions where the writing skills are dealt with, if they conduct exercises, and we try and encourage the writing principles lecturers to assess on the basis of those writing skills. So where there are express sessions and they have to focus on international referencing, then where referencing would usually form 10%, constitute 10% of assessment for that assignment, it would constitute 50% for that assignment. So students know added value is attached to their ability to reference international sources, and they focus on that skill.
So, but then there are sessions where there's no assessment or formal assessment or evaluation. So it's not always a case of the CC. I think subtly, we count on the lecturers communicating continuously throughout the course of the module the importance of the writers, not just in the lecture session. So whether for the tutor communicating formally with the students, the tutor also needs to be at the importance of that skill. Whether that translates into practice on a daily basis, I don't sit in the way of this course. I do believe that they focus on the skills. But I think it works. Yeah.
Is everyone involved in the strategy from when it started until now? Is everyone involved? Somebody who has a background in the
Is everybody involved? Someone who has a background in the yes, I'm trying to think now whether someone who doesn't have a background. Well, the only person, we've got one writing consultant who has a background in a very limited background in reading, but a specialist in proofreading language, so she covers a different spectrum of all our consultancy service. But otherwise, everybody is that particular background. I think they can't, but simply teaching learning systems implement. So they are a role players extremely important.
That's good. I suppose the flip side of the question is traditionally run some courses until like sessions. We do not necessarily have this in the background. But in your case,
the only and I want to be I want to say the wrong thing now. The only problem we've experienced on the basis of feedback is the first semester of writing skills once a year. First semester is teaching students reading strategies. First semester is taught by the language. Historically, it's just been the case that the language is taught first 6 months of writing skills. The problem is you've got individuals teaching students how to read in law without those people that are in legal line. And students and that's fine from feedback. So that's what we have. But we have made a conscious from the faculty side and from the universities to incorporate as much legal material as possible into that component to make it seem like it's not something that's presented in isolation from the faculty by a reading specialist. But that's what and I'm not sure how that's going to be.
so ideally, it's really like
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just on a very basic level, students listen more if they know that you've been in practice and you know what practice entails. What you need to be drafting, how you need to be drafting it. You've been there, so you can talk to them. If you haven't been there, then passive participation. No, it's fine.
Okay. Is there a role for writing specialists in writing discipline?
Look, I don't think, I think there is a role for writing specialists, but not in isolation. I think it needs to take place in conjunction with people that have substantive knowledge about that specific discipline. So I could benefit having the assistance of a writing specialist by my side, assisting me to develop assessment skills that I could implement within my writing skills, for example. But on its own, questionable. Yeah, so, yes. I think so. I think when you've got someone standing in front of the class and dealing with the material, especially if a writing is a course where they learn to write in law, you can't expect someone who does not have the background, whether it's economics, whether it's biology, it doesn't matter, to teach them how to write. That defeats the purpose of the writing process within program. I'm not saying it's not useful in some context, but typically I think.
Any other questions? On the roll?
One other question. Yeah. Do you use any kind of online assessment to test writing skills? So, for example, referencing to use a test on Sunburn to see whether students can reference.
That's a good question. The writing intensive courses, I know of a writing intensive course where they make extensive use of Sunburn to assess this. So, for example, you need to criticize the premises in an argument. And the piece of the argument or the relevant argument was placed on Sunday, and you need to go over which is click on the correct one. So to that extent it is available on Sunday, and then generic in writing is 171. There's exactly that, the reference test where they put it online and complete. Reference it correctly where it's cited. But I think it's a very valuable platform that's underutilized. We're dealing with digital natives, so we need to get them to engage in with the community as well. So there's definitely room for improvement in that regard.
That's also just so much more efficient.
From a time
perspective, marking and so on. That's one of the problems that we face in first year with 500 students with philosophy. To teach them referencing and looking and marking which is impossible. We're trying to look at ways to do that much more efficiently and teach them before the time, and they're not worried too much about checking it later. Getting a system to do it. I'm just wondering, it seems like you guys are doing it. There must be some way to do even more of that. I myself in philosophy, arguments are of course, this is what we're dealing with, often at a very abstract level. But to try and teach the students how to identify the argument and so on, the platform itself is too limited. As soon as you go into any kind of complexity, it's lost. You can't go beyond something sort of that's more than two premises. Then it's lost. I'm just wondering, does anybody know how to do these more complex things? Are there tools?
Yeah,
I've looked around quite a lot using this iLogo software and these kinds of things, but there's nothing that's sort of like breakthrough technology.
I don't know answer to that. At a first level, we can do the two things. We can't do it in second level. So it's whatever assessed by someone sitting in a room and watching. And that's also included one of the biggest components of the assessment stuff is the substantive component. So I don't know whether we need to
Yeah. But in the English curriculum, the one that we access is the A-level. And it's very English part of that is very radical. So they're trying to develop software to mark pieces of writing, and they kind of put the level down and they tested it. And so very famous pieces of writing. So just almost everywhere. Out of the speech and very famous little
It's very difficult. I think there's some scope for improvement there.
Yeah, I think there are things that the whole argument that we want to teach models.
Yeah.
Argument which they can apply. And when it comes to the actual writing,
Yeah, it's very difficult.
the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, the only way. Yeah. Yeah, we've tried that using basically a peer review system. You can force everybody to do their assignment and have to put it uploaded, and then it gets marked by 2 other students, and they get feedback. But a lot of students hate that. They think, number one, that these other people are idiots. They don't know what they're doing. That's their impression. And I also feel like this is now a bit unfair because we did it as a pilot. We said, okay, you won't get a mark for it. You can send in basically a draft. And 2 people are going to mark it and look at it, and then you can hand in your final essay to the lecturer. It wasn't a long 1,000 words. And then I felt, this guy that I'm marking, he's written something that's stupid, and now he's reading somebody else's that's really good, and he's going to take some of that, and he's going to put it into his own essay. And so these things always have upsides and downsides.
But talk about tips.
Yeah.
Right in pedagogy. But that is often the lecturer has to provide that feedback. The person who has the knowledge, the knower.
Yeah.
You can't really expect the person who isn't the knower to be able to do something.
Yeah.
So it's really good.
One thing that's useful about peer review is it seems like the students are a little bit sort of they're watching each other and they don't want to seem like complete idiots. So they put a bit more effort into it.
Yeah.
But that's just my own sort of view of it.
And when you peer review, does it count towards the mark?
No, but you have to do it. It's a compulsory part of it, but it doesn't contribute to
But
it.
you can actually. What we did on one of the courses, I was involved in last year. Of course, the lectures, but postgraduate diploma is really assessing the quality of the
Yeah.
and then you want to invest a little time in teaching them how to give sustainable feedback because that's quite complicated. And sometimes you need to model it. So you should start the discussion as a lecture. Just put something out there and they've got to put it okay, from there. So what you assess is the quality of feedback. And so there's going to be a little more time putting something down in that discussion. So it's sometimes good for getting them to do that. Invest in that time. But it's the problem of
Yeah, it's just for interest. Like this is our legal writing website, and here's the writing consultant. You can simply go to the link and book a consultant, and then we've got various resources on the website. We've got sorry, it's taking a while. We've got course what do you call it, Silke? Law terminology translation booklet of some sort. We've got the writing guide here. We've got abbreviations. We've got journal articles on legal writing, plagiarism videos, and so forth. And then a list of, based on feedback that we've received from the lecturers, we've drafted a list of the words often misspelled. But I think there's definitely room on the website to develop a kind of a portal where lecturers can go in, if it's not catered for in Sunday, some kind of assessment portal, Ideally, over the long term, that's something you'd be able to move to, because it sounds like what you've got in mind, because it's not catered for in Sunday. I've used clickers and the works, but nothing more advanced than that. But in any event, so you can browse around on the website, contain all the information about the faculty writing. If you have any questions, you always be welcome.
All right, before I thank you, if I could ask you to please complete the feedback form before you go, that's all right. No, sí, sí, sí,